Today, we're taking a look at the Boeing XB-15, which was considered to be the first of the so-called super bombers that were developed in the United States in the lead-up to and during the Second World War. It can be considered the cousin to the Douglas XB-19, which we covered recently, but although these two aircraft were both incredibly large, setting records in their own right, the Boeing has often been overshadowed or outright ignored, despite its own contributions to the field of designing large aircraft. Today's video attempts to correct this, though sadly there's nowhere near as much information available on the XB-15 as there was on the Douglas XB-19, so this one is a little bit shorter. It's also a reminder of the powerful role that media plays in shaping public opinion, and why I'm happy to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Ground News. This app and website is a great way to stay up to date on breaking news stories we might otherwise miss. For example, I've been following news about aircraft and came across this story that US fighter jets intercepted Russian planes operating in international airspace near Alaska. Ground News shows us that only 17 sources are reporting on this story, and it's interesting to see that it's covered quite evenly across the political spectrum. In both the app and the website, we're able to compare headlines from all the articles reporting on this story, and see where in the world it's being covered, and click in to read from its original source to really get a comprehensive perspective. Ground News isn't a news publisher, rather they aggregate thousands of local and international sources to provide context into the media available, so that we can stay fully informed and think critically about the news we consume. So if you want to get a comprehensive view of the news, go to ground.news/rex or click on the link below and check it out for free, or you can subscribe before March the 24th and get unlimited access for as little as $5 a month and support a small team striving for media transparency. Once again, thank you to Ground News for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to the Boeing XB-15. Like the recently featured Douglas XB-19, the Boeing XB-15 can trace its origins back to the early 1930s. Aircraft technology was advancing at a rapid pace, and with the emergence of the all-metal cantilever monoplane, the US Army Air Corps wanted to explore the development of very large and very long-range heavy bombers. Considering the geopolitical and geographical situation, this made a lot of sense. Any nation that could realistically be expected as a future adversary in some future war was incredibly far away. With the current technology, any future war would currently require the United States to base their air units on the territory of a future ally. Say, for example, the United Kingdom, if war were to erupt with the Soviet Union. But if the US were denied the luxury of basing their bomber force on friendly soil, or perhaps if they were to fight a war in the Pacific, with thousands of miles separating their scattered territories, they would struggle to mount any kind of effective aerial campaign, and nothing in their current inventory had the range. This resulted in the issuing of Projects A and D of the Experimental Long-Range Bomber Program. Project A initially called for a design that could carry 2,000 pounds, or 910 kilograms of bombs, over a 5,000-mile or 8,046-kilometer range at a speed of 200 miles an hour, which is roughly 320 kilometers an hour. The bomb load was eventually deemed totally inadequate, and the requirement was at some point scaled up, though there seems to be little source material on what the new, larger bomb load requirements actually were. Eventually, 4 companies responded to the Army's requirements. Boeing and Martin submitted designs for Project A, while Douglas and Sikorsky drew up designs for the more ambitious Project D. Known internally as the Model 294, and initially labelled by the Army as the XB-15, the Boeing design was drawn up by a team led by John Jack Kilstra. It was a considerable step up from any aircraft previously built by the company. Its 2 most ambitious designs up until that point had been the twin-engined 247 airliner and the Y-1B9 experimental bomber. The Model 294, on the other hand, was to be a 4-engine aircraft whose wingspan alone was twice that of either of those designs, and it was to feature a large suite of cutting-edge technology. In the subsequent Air Corps review, which compared the proposals from Martin and Boeing, the design submitted by Boeing was viewed to be superior, and it was ordered to be built as the XB-15 prototype. Not long after this, Projects A and D were amalgamated into the new Experimental Bomber Long Range program, and the XB-15 became known as the XBLR-1. Much like the XBLR-2, which became the Douglas XB-19, completion of the Boeing design faced significant delays. In fact, it was some of these delays, as the design preceded the Douglas model by about 18 months, that almost led to the cancellation of the XB-19 by Douglas, had the Air Corps not stubbornly dug their heels in. Not only was producing an aircraft on this scale a significant challenge for Boeing, as nothing before it came even close in scale, but finding engines powerful enough to get it airborne was even more so. Due to its projected size and weight, Boeing had planned to use the experimental V-3420 being designed by Allison. Comprising of two V-1710 engines, which were stuck together on a common crankcase, this 56-litre W-24 was expected to put out over 2,000 horsepower at takeoff. Indeed, it would eventually manage 2,600. But this engine was not ready when Boeing needed it, and they were forced to fall back on much less powerful alternatives. Eventually, the Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp was selected instead. And while on its own merits it was a very good engine, the model being installed on the Boeing prototype only produced 1,000 horsepower at takeoff, which was a significant downgrade. On its own, this was trouble enough, as having your shiny new bomber being reduced to less than 40% of its intended power was less than ideal. But then, the Boeing design team went through the painful process of actually building the aircraft as well. Construction of the prototype took over 2 years to complete, with it not being ready until the autumn of 1937. Though the power plant issue had caused some of this delay, most of it was a result of the aircraft's size. Entirely new construction practices, tools, jigs, and installation procedures were pioneered, and pioneering this stuff, with its usual routine of trial and error, took time. In fact, it took so long that by the time the prototype was complete, the XBLR program had actually been dropped, and the aircraft would make its first flight as the XB-15 once again. A good example of the challenges that were faced and overcome with the XB-15 is to compare it to the Model 299. Design work on the 299 had begun at almost the same time as that for the XB-15, with the Air Corps requesting a replacement for the Martin B-10. But the XB-15 had just enough of a head start that the lessons learned from its own development could be applied in real time as construction of the 299 got underway. Because of this, the 299, which was the prototype for the B-17 Flying Fortress, made its maiden flight 2 years before the XB-15 did. Its smaller size certainly helped to speed up the process, but many aspects of its construction had been directly improved by the growing mountain of challenges that were dogging that of the XB-15. Eventually, said design challenges were overcome, and the Boeing design team breathed a sigh of relief as the XB-15 rolled out for its maiden flight on the 15th of October 1937. At the time, it was the largest and most advanced aircraft built in the United States. It had a wingspan of 149 feet, or 45.4 meters, a length of 87 feet 7 inches, or 26.7 meters, and a height of 18 feet 1 inch, or 5.5 meters. Much like the XB-19, the wings were so large that they allowed for the provision of a service tunnel, which allowed engineers access to the engines during flight to perform maintenance and emergency repairs. Empty, it weighed approximately 37,700 pounds, or 17,100 kilograms, and fully loaded it could take off at 70,000 pounds, or approximately 32,000 kilos. As a result of this heavy weight, it had been decided to use twin wheels for each of the main undercarriage units, something that might have served the designers of the literally groundbreaking Douglas XB-19 some considerable grief had they done the same. Due to the long range it was intended to fly, the aircraft featured a cutting-edge autopilot system, along with spacious accommodation for the crew. In fact, it was remarked that the XB-15, with its upholstered crew resting area, complete with bunks, lavatory facility, and galley, was more luxurious than many transatlantic airliners at the time. Technical innovations included, but were not limited to, a new fuel system, de-icing systems for the wings. Electrical power was supplied by two 100-volt AC generators, which themselves were driven by two auxiliary petrol engines, which was an engineering first for this sort of thing, and the aircraft featured a station for a flight engineer, who took over many of the mechanical duties that would have gone to the pilot and co-pilot, which, for an aircraft of the XB-15's size and complexity, would have been a considerable task on top of their other main duties. Though a lot of this was deeply impressive, and it was the most advanced aircraft Boeing had yet produced, the XB-15 was already outclassed before it had even left the ground. This was the price of progress. Firstly, the numerous delays caused by pioneering the XB-15's construction meant that it was completed months, or even years, after other aircraft were already benefiting from the lessons it had produced. Secondly, work was progressing, albeit at a glacial pace, on the Douglas XB-19, which dwarfed the Boeing design in physical size, range, payload capacity, and of course, weight. And thirdly, the projected requirements for a heavy bomber had changed so much in just a few short years that bringing the XB-15 up to scratch would require a major redesign. Though sometimes referred to as the Super Flying Fortress, the XB-15 had considerably less defensive guns than the B-17. It was equipped with just 6, 3 30-caliber machine guns and 3 50-caliber. 2 guns were mounted in ventral turrets, 1 in a dorsal turret, another was in the nose, and there were 2 waist positions. A tail gun was not provided at all. When first designed, this was the most powerful defensive armament arrangement yet seen on a bomber, but again, by the time the XB-15 was complete, it could only be deemed as adequate, just. The question of obsolescence was further confirmed during the aircraft's maiden flight and subsequent evaluations. It was flown by test pilots Major John Corkill from the Air Corps and Edmund Allen, an engineer who often worked with Boeing. Though they reported that the XB-15 handled well for its size and was considered easy to maneuver, its power deficit resulted in some very disappointing performance figures. Even when empty, it could not attain the required top speed of 200 miles an hour, topping out at just 197, and when loaded with a simulated bomb load of 2,000 pounds, this dropped down to just 145 miles an hour. To say this ruled out any possibility of the XB-15 being developed into an actual frontline bomber would be an understatement. However, all was not lost. Though not particularly fast, it could still carry very large payloads, far more than the 2,000 pounds initially tested, and there were hopes of a change in power plant. And Boeing were looking at follow-up designs as well. Because of this, and not wanting to waste valuable resources, time, and money, the XB-15 was officially entered into Army service in 1939, being assigned to the 2nd Bombardment Group based at Langley Field. The planned successor for the XB-15 design was known as the Y-1B-20, or the Boeing Model 316. It was meant to be slightly larger than the XB-15, and it was to have a much more powerful set of engines. 2 orders were placed at some point in late 1938, but these were eventually cancelled in favour of other projects, specifically the one that would lead to the B-29. Part of the XB-15 design would live on in the Boeing 314 Clipper, which literally took the design of the XB-15's wings and essentially slapped it onto the hull of a giant flying boat. As for the XB-15 itself, its service life was relatively brief, but it was quite eventful. It earned a moderate claim to fame during the events following the 1939 Chilean earthquake. Flown by a crew led by Major Caleb Haynes, the XB-15 was flown down to Santiago for an urgent relief mission carrying supplies for the Red Cross. Thanks to its huge range, it only had to make 2 stops along the way, one at Panama and one at Lima. After completing this vital aid mission, Haynes was awarded the Order of Merit of Chile and would also receive the Distinguished Flying Cross. The flight itself, carried out in record time, across remote regions and at near record ranges, also earned the entire crew the Mackay Trophy, which was an annual award given in the United States for the most meritorious flight of the year. Though the XB-15 was inadequate as a bomber, this flight, and subsequent flight tests throughout 1939, proved that it could operate as an excellent transport. Throughout the year, several payload and altitude records were set by the XB-15, along with some for endurance as well. On August the 2nd, the XB-15 set a world record for flying 3,109 miles with a 4,400-pound payload at an average speed of 166.3 miles an hour. In light of this, the combat load for the XB-15 was increased to approximately 8,000 pounds. And although its usefulness as a bomber was limited due to its speed, it did still drop the occasional bomb, albeit in training exercises and testing, rather than as a weapon of war. By the time of Pearl Harbor, it had actually been stripped of all defensive weaponry, and was used exclusively for bomb accuracy tests and various transport duties. With the United States now at war with Japan, its use as an experimental bomber came to an abrupt end, and it was decided to convert the XB-15 into a dedicated transport. A set of cargo doors were installed on the fuselage, as was an internal cargo hoist, and the aircraft was redesignated as the XC-105 on the 6th of May 1943. Operated by the 20th Troop Carrier Squadron, the XC-105 was often nicknamed Grandpappy. This went against the trend of often giving aircraft and naval vessels feminine names and titles, and this may have been a reflection on the somewhat recalcitrant nature that had taken hold of the aircraft since its conversion to transport duties. Its gross weight had gone up to around 92,000 pounds, and along with the addition of the extra cargo equipment and hoists, this had a horrific effect on its in-flight handling. While the XB-15 was found to be relatively easy to fly for an aircraft of its size, the XC-105 flew with the grace of a startled elephant, heavy and prone to erratic movements. This may have had a part in the aircraft's early retirement as well, after just 18 months of use in this role. But there was also the issue of getting spare parts for a one-off airframe, and the fact that the US was now building huge numbers of dedicated transport aircraft as it was. The issue of spare parts was further exacerbated by a complete failure of the electrical system, which occurred mid-flight, and at least 2 separate incidences where the aircraft actually caught fire, possibly as a result of said electrical problems, but the details on this have been hard to find. Still, despite trying to occasionally electrocute and immolate its 6-man crew, the XC-105 completed at least 70 transport missions and an almost equal number of other missions such as anti-submarine reconnaissance. It transported over 5,200 passengers, 440,000 pounds of cargo, and almost 100,000 pounds of mail. After being retired from use in December of 1944, the XC-105 was deemed unsafe for further flight and was assigned to the Panama Air Depot. There it lay for approximately 6 months before scrapping began, with the engines, rudder, and vertical stabilizers being removed, as well as various internal parts and equipment. The empty shell that remained was then unceremoniously dumped in a swamp southwest of the airfield, where it still lies today, covered by an industrial area. The XB-15 got a pretty rough treatment, both at the end of its life and in the eyes of the US Army Air Corps and those who study aviation history. A large part of this was because it was literally overshadowed by the Douglas XB-19, which was developed slightly after it, but was already benefiting from improvements in technology, specifically in the design of power plants. But the XB-15 was still vitally important to Boeing, and its development aided in the establishment of practices that were then used to produce the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you, of course, to the Patreon supporters whose names you'll see here. Now, this video should have gone up about a week ago, but as usual, about a dozen different things got in the way. There seems to be a running theme at the moment, but hey, here we are. I've also had a couple of issues with my voice recently, which hasn't helped either. A big thank you, of course, to our Wing Commander tier patrons, our highest tier supporters, and a warm welcome to Reese Revs, who is the newest member of this special group. I'll be putting up an update on Patreon soon about the planned trip to the UK, and a couple of things I'm going to do whilst I'm over there, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you all for your continued support, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.